So in the next 20 minutes, I want to share a few thoughts about personal knowledge graphs. What I found that the most successful ones are lacking, and what I do to compensate for that. There will be a short demo, and last, a few words on where I think personal knowledge graphs are heading. Since you are at this conference, I don't think you need any convincing of the value of knowledge graphs, but maybe you might need to be convinced why personal knowledge graphs are important. And the shortest reason for that is, I believe everything is personal. But to argue about this, we would need, I think, a whole day workshop, which we don't have. So I will go to the other extreme and just say that personal knowledge graphs are personal. And I would like to share my reasons that I'm so attracted to them. And the first one is my personal needs. For over 2 decades, I've been looking and trying different ways to manage my personal information. And Alan mentioned a few use cases, but beyond those, like research, journaling, and to-dos, currently all my projects are there, all my relationship management, my training courses and everything around them, everything that I write, highlights from Kindle books that I link, social media integration, and many, many other things. Another reason for me is phenomenology. I'm simply interested to understand how we interact with knowledge representation and how the affordances of different tools change that. Another driver for me is my interest in cognitive science, especially the inactive school in cognitive science, but also distributed cognition and even the extended mind hypothesis is quite relevant here. And the fourth need that is in direct relation with what I do daily is enterprise knowledge graphs, or I think I'll refer to them as business knowledge graphs. So it seems that decision makers in companies and organizations, they find it difficult to understand the benefits of knowledge graphs. And the result of that is a lot of waste, huge IT investments that just create technical debt. So I believe if they start to manage their personal information, which is important for them, in personal knowledge graphs, they would understand by experiencing these benefits. They could imagine they could extend this experience and see what would be the benefits for the enterprise to do that. So that's my fourth reason. And one of the things people would do would be, for example, what I'm doing now, presenting. What we usually do, as with documents, as with spreadsheets, our mail, all this personal information is trapped in different silos. So when we're going to present something, we trap that information in a slide deck. And it's there. It's not linked with anything else. It's not really reusable. And in fact, we have to recreate it. We make some copies, but that's changing that has a tremendous effect. First, all these cases that I mentioned, they increase my productivity. But currently, in fact, I'm not presenting from a slide deck. I'm presenting what you see here are facets from my personal knowledge graph. So in fact, every slide is a node in that graph, and every block, which is a paragraph inside or element in that slide, is also a node linked in to other nodes, and it reappears in different contexts for different purposes. Now it's a slide, in the other situation could be something else. And that also applies to images that you see. In fact, very soon it will be applied to elements inside the images. And when we interact with the personal knowledge graphs, there's a dynamical system emerging, and this dynamical system could be successful if certain balances are kept, like the balance between stability and diversity, autonomy and cohesion, and exploration and exploitation. And that's the case. Every successful system works, including our immune system, our enterprises, our society. That part I think is missing from the designers of these tools. And these tools, in fact, there is a pandemic of these tools. The last 2 years, I think I have counted personally almost 50. They are called tools for thought, or you can also call them network note-taking, but some clearly qualify as personal knowledge graphs, like Canopy, that Brian is going to show later, Codex, Rome, which I've been using, and I'll show you a few things that is not available in Rome, but I'm adding them as workarounds. Then Athens and Logsex, they're open source clones of Rome. Obsidian, it's not so graphy, but in terms of data-centric approach, is quite ahead. And in terms of security, you have actually all your data is markdown, and you can reuse it with another tool. And also Hypernote. So all these, apart from Codex, I have tested myself. And Codex I keep here because, in fact, it uses Neo4j, so it's clearly a graph-based solution. In terms of nodes, this is my Rome personal graph that is now 1 year old. It looks like that. So it has almost 3,000 nodes. But in fact, if that was the case, I wouldn't be much interested. The reality is that it has 68,000 nodes because every paragraph has an ID. It's called block. It has ID. It could be connected with other paragraphs, and their context can be recombined, and so on. So this is not represented here, and it's much bigger, and that's actually the power of that tool, that the granularity is a paragraph of the text. It has its ID, its URI, and from there you can do quite a lot. So that's about nodes. What about the relationships? Overall, all these tools, they stop at references. But if you want to, so what does it mean? It's like going the style of wikis and some early tools like Zim, where you would make manually a word that would be an entity, and that will create a page which will refer back to everywhere this is mentioned. But that's actually not enough. That these tools currently do not allow you to specify what kind of reference is that. You may not want to do that always, but in many cases, you would need a bit more semantics. And the other thing which is normally missing is the direction of the relations. They're bidirectional, but relationships, they're not treated as first-class citizen. The situation in Rome is the following. Apart from these page references at the level of paragraphs, as I said, called block, there are also block references. They're very powerful. But below the surface, it's much more interesting than that. There are 34 relationships. Unfortunately, they're called attributes. But in fact, you can do with them a lot of things that you would normally do if that were properties. They're directed. You query in a way that you would very similar that you would query with Sparkle. Unfortunately, they're not presented to the user so that the user can do, for example, a very nice thing is the relationship, because it's an outliner, the relationship between one level of a block to the nested level, that is the child paragraph. And it would be nice if this parent-child relationship could be specified for different cases, like you would do with RDFS. You would put a subproperty of, and in some cases, you would show that relationship to be between a type and an instance. In other case, could be represent a part of, or some other things. And that is actually not available. But what they added as a third type user accessible relations, and it is directed. That is something that they call attribute. It works in a similar way like page references, but it has direction. You can actually point to something, and there are nice functionalities around that. And this is what one of the things I actually used to add a bit more semantics, which I was missing. My project is not so ambitious, but first thing that I wanted to achieve somehow is a bit more explicit semantics in Rome. And that's I'm doing with a practice, sort of with a way of using it, not a real hack. That I call RioFlow, and Rio stands for Rome Internal Ontology. Internally because it's not shared, but of course I'd be happy to share it so people can reuse it if they find similar things happening with their graphs. And then comes other things like inferencing and export JSON LD. Now it's export just JSON. Then I'll be happy if something like importing ontologies could be achieved. The other big thing is to enrich the Rome graph with data from open knowledge graphs. And that would mean running Sparkle queries from Rome. The nice thing is to get facts about people, places, and things like from open graphs like Wikidata. Wikidata is extremely rich, and in fact, in many cases, you would find that not only the quantity of data is quite a lot for certain things that you would normally not find from, you'd say, official sources, but also the quality. In a few cases, I saw that the information about countries is more accurate than that coming from the National Statistical Institute publications. The other would be to run any Sparkle query against any endpoint, but not just to run it and to bring things. Bringing them, you would integrate this external knowledge with your internal in a new nice mesh. And currently, there are quite good URIs for all items. That means something that is containers, which are the pages and the paragraphs, the blocks. But if you move them to another graph, they keep the local part, but they take the namespace of the graph. That would be fine for some cases. For others, it would be nice to keep, to make them persistent.
So Ivo, a question about the Sparkle querying capability. You mentioned Datalog before, and I'm wondering if you could compare and contrast the two in terms of their capabilities and what Sparkle brings to the table that Datalog might not, and vice versa.
When you query data in your Rome graph, you have sort of a query language that's for the users, but also Datalog is allowed. That Datalog could be used by users, and it's the way you access the data. So people that develop extensions, they also use Datalog. And in fact, Datalog is similar. There, apart from the triple, there are a few more things. One is the transaction ID, and the other is what kind of transaction you would do. But for just querying, not for changing, it's very much like Sparkle. Of course, you only access with that your own data. While with Sparkle, we can access Sparkle endpoints, we can do federated queries, we can do a lot of nice things. I'm not very experienced in that. I just use it for my personal needs, and I learn it by making some funny things with my personal knowledge management system. And there are quite a few capabilities of Sparkle that are not available in Datalog, and I think in a few cases it's vice versa. In fact, I see that some tools for big knowledge graphs, they start to combine them, like RDF Fox seems to use Datalog for inferencing instead of OWL, and they show also there are some advantages over Sparkle. But for other things, even simple things like recursive queries, I couldn't find a way to do it in Datalog. In any case, Datalog you would use for your local graph, not for graphs outside.
Thanks, I appreciate the explanation.
And in fact, I'm going to show Sparkle. So this real flow is sort of a user emergent ontology, and currently it's nothing really as something to be conceptualized, thought through. It's not the approach I apply when I make an OWL or shackle ontology at all. In fact, I observe what I do, and certain patterns, they just appear reusable, and I then apply sort of a quasi DL ontology approach to it. And currently I have 95 classes and 22 properties, which is also strange. Most of the other ontologies, rather the opposite, they're rich in properties and poor on classes. That was a very interesting thing to see. Maybe that's only my case, but I don't know. And on top of it is something that I called ROCO, Rome Core Ontology. It should be called UP or something else, but I just like the abbreviation. That's why it let like that. And it defines classes such as class and property, and properties such as subclass of and same as. Of course, they with these names just to mimic the FNL. And in fact, these are used for aligning the other emergent ontologies with other ontologies, and to, for example, same as to integrate your own knowledge graph with external knowledge graphs. And it's useful to do that. I found that missing, and I'm happy that I'm able to do it. And that could be, of course, things for general knowledge. You would be happy to find and to bring in your graph statements from this publicly curated place. And Wikidata now has 12 billion statements. That's quite a lot. That would also help with a lot of multilingual features. DBpedia is quite a lot, Iago. And the other thing which is interesting now is of course, Google Knowledge Graph. The fact that I believe that it has 86 billion triples is coming from the Common Crawl corpus that discovered that those are the triples mainly available as JSON-LD and RDFA. And all that can be queried one way or another. The other, because it's so much a research tool, the other thing is the scientific publications. There are nice sources like the Microsoft Academic Knowledge Graph, open citations, and of course domain knowledge. It's worth mentioning those interested in proteins that you can bring a lot of things from Unipro that has 81 billion triples. I think is maybe the biggest open RDF graph available. So now it's time for a demo. I hope that you'll be able to see, because if I close this, so it's just an overlay. If I close it, what you see is my daily note. It's sort of the backbone of the graph. So this is the stable part. You do a lot of things, but you have the daily notes that you can use for task events and journaling and what have you. And this is for the 4th of May, where not surprisingly, we have an event that is the current Knowledge Graph conference, and that link that I used to enter here. And what you see below is in fact just blocks and nested blocks in them. And from there, I presented. So these are things which have their ID. If I just open this one, you see that is the local part, and the other is the namespace of my graph. This graph, I have several graphs. But now let's see a bit what I'm compositing. I'm not going to present ROM itself, just what my workarounds. They are templates, so many things could be created right away. And now I'll just create one block, which will be for this workshop. So I have such a template, and it creates this block and 2 child blocks. What you see here is in fact these relationships that are called attributes. They're special type of page references. So workshop on, of course, personal knowledge graphs at the Knowledge Graph conference, moderated by Alan Morisson. And of course, if I go to these places, there will be a lot of linked information. Well, these are notes in my graph. But let's focus on just this block. So the way I'm treating it as a certain instance. And in this case, it's an instance of the class workshop and the class event. Because these are not just tags, these are things which I defined in my ontology. So if I go to workshop, what I'm doing now, when I click on it, I'll open it just in a sidebar. So if I go to workshop, you see here, workshop is a class described by Rio, and it's a subclass of event. The other nice thing is, because there is the title is linked with the ID, in fact, when something which is the so-called attribute, that is also a page and a container of other things, appears in a block like here, then you don't have any problem with reification, because in fact, that appearance of a reusable item in the block works as a link between the type of relationship and the actual instance of the usage in that particular link, workshop subclass of event, that triple. And if we go to see what event is, event is, of course, a class. Again, class is described by Rio. It has equivalent class, and in this case, I use an item which is emoji item, because in many cases it's much more convenient to have it. And this is not a data log. This is very user-oriented query, which brings the subclasses of event defined in my ontology. In this case, they're interview, tennis appointment, this is what I do a lot, conference, and workshop. So you see them below. So let's now make another example, which is so this was an event, and the other thing very commonly used in this network note-taking apps is tasks. So I'm going to make a task, which is, let's say, to send.
Brian or Chu, have any questions based on what you've already just presented, Ivo? Brian, any thoughts about what Ivo's showing us here? Any observations?
Yeah, it's very interesting. So, I guess, is it correct to say with Rome, if you construct your blocks and everything and use attributes in the right way, then with Rio and Rocco, you can get something that's actually queryable with Sparkle? But it's all about kind of making sure you're using attributes and things in Rome correctly?
No, you don't need Sparkle. It's queryable with the query language that is available for users. I mean,
sure.
It's queryable for both that query language. There are even templates that you can use with ready queries, and also it's available with Datalog. The way you would write nodes, you would write a Datalog query inside and query your data, because in this graph, in fact, code and data are the same thing, and that's actually the case in all Clojure applications, I believe.
Yeah, and I guess, can you show a use case of, so you have the query, I mean, is this something you use day to day to just, yeah?
Yes, a lot. I'll show you that. Just
okay.
Let me show you an example of the actual flow where that the ontology is supporting.
Great.
So here I will close the event and the outline. So here you see two tags which I made as classes. So I want to more seriously work with them, and I'll open them both on the side. So you see, one is to send and the other is sent. So when I open their references, you see now this to send, it has an instance, the block that I created here, to send something to somebody. And you see here the path, this knowledge graph conference demo. You see that part you see here. There is nothing different than that. So we have the class to send with an individual of a member of that. Let's, of course, if somebody of you is imagining classes in object-oriented term, no, this is just more like sets, so member of a set. And because I can send also blocks from Rome to Twitter, there are previous use cases where that was used. And here you have, so this is to send, and this is sent. I'll just open that. So these are different sent things, but well, the last is from 27th of April, so there is nothing recent. While here, 4th of May, we have this to send something to somebody. And so I will click this as done. You see what happened here? To send is now sent. And here below to send, the instance disappeared, and now it is an instance of sent, and it appeared for the first time within the container 4th of May. So this movement was like that. In fact, I can show it to you as an illustration here, using another block, which is another node for my graph, of course. So this was the movement. That block, the task I created in my daily note page, it was a member of both to do, which is a class, and to send. And then by making it done, it became a member of intersection of the classes sent and done. Of course, that is one way of treating it that is, well, more relaxed. It could be modeled in a different way where you would have sent as subclass of done. But the important thing is that the change of state makes that dynamic, and it's something that I use a lot. It's very, very, very useful. All right, so that was a bit about that ontology, but maybe you'll be interested to see more of it. So where should I go?
So Ivo, while we've got pause here, I think that a couple of questions from the audience. So Eric Scott is asking, how accessible is the underlying closure code to the user in Rome?
From what I hear, not much. I don't.
Not much.
Don't really know. You have access to these attributes that I mentioned, these 34 attributes, but currently there is not a real API. There is sort of an API. So the extensions to Rome are all written in JavaScript. So there is some access to something, but not too deep. And there is currently not a real API, which for me is one of the deficiencies, because I'm used to sending, forwarding emails, for example, to my personal knowledge management systems, like previously Evernote. And that kind of thing here is missing. And I have to also have and I do have a workaround for that.
Okay.
That might not be the case with the clones of Rome, like Athens, that is also written in Clojure. Maybe they have full access, but with Rome, that's not the case.
Thanks for that answer. And then from Luis Arias, are these semantic hacks using existing Rome features, or are you using a fork of the code base?
It is existing features. It's sort of a practice, sort of a discipline way of using Rome. So it's convention based. Every user can do that if they want to have more semantics. That was the part which was related to these two internal ontologies, which I'm going now to show a bit in full.
Okay.
But that's not the case with the next hack, which I'm going to show. That is a real hack, and it's not available in Rome. It's made as something additional in JavaScript. So to send is described by Rio. So let's see this Rio finally. Yeah. So that's the page of the ontology. And you see, in fact, that this query would always update that embedded result page as a block. So this is also something which has its ID and the relationships, of course, with the parent and so on. And here I'm using this relationship between an instance and a class. So this is an instance of this query, which is a wrong query. And of course, you can imagine wrong query is a class, that is subclass of query, and so on. So here are things which I found useful to have as classes, things like company, topic, lesson, risk, closed, which is in combination with issue, for example, to report, added, asked, tested. All these are classes I use daily. Database, organization, workshop, webinar, song, to do, of course, invoice, tutorial, bug, article, ontology, tool, idea, and so on. And about the properties, they're currently 22 and they slowly grow. Yeah, things like has source, at, is member of, works at, by, for, managed by is similar case. And I have a few emojis that I use, for example, to specify different kind of issues. That's about the ontology. If there are questions, I can show more things. But now let me show you the other, maybe a bit more interesting for some hack. This workshop on personal knowledge graphs is at that conference. Of course, as I told you, I can verify this by just putting another child has start date or start time, and this is so trivial. But let's see how my personal knowledge graphs could be integrated with some open graphs. So I now will open here in the middle the page of the Knowledge Graph Conference. You see there are certain linked references, of course, to that daily page where I made this presentation so far. Let's close this and let's get a few facts from an external knowledge graph and link them with my personal knowledge graph. So Knowledge Graph Conference was discovered right away in Wikidata, so I can just import it. And this will create blocks and, of course, sort of triples as children of a new block called Sparkle Import. Of course, I can change it to something else. And this is, of course, you see coming from Wikidata instance of conference series. But the important thing is, when this is captured, it's also directly aligned. Like, for example, this inception is something created or reused, depending if it was previously available, property in my graph. But if I go there, you'll see it will open on the right. It is same as the actual property from the Wikidata. So already this was actually either there, in this case it wasn't, it was created during the import. And even more interestingly, you see this conference has main subject knowledge graph, which I can go and get everything that Wikidata knows about knowledge graphs. But also, if I click here, because it is a node of my knowledge graph, it has a lot of references previously to other nodes that I created or used for something. And of course, it's also same as, and I can go and query that. Let's see something else again with this hack. So I'll write something here. I hope the next conference will be physical one at, say, why not Denver? So just created this child block, Denver. And now I'll show you another functionality of this hack. So here, the lookup would not be on the container, but it will be on that specific node. So I change the current page to the current block, the next level granularity, and then we have Denver, found from Wikidata. In this case, it could be configured to something else. And then again, it will create these blocks inside my graph as an outliner, and if there are properties, they will be created or reused depending on the case. In this situation, there also images. So first was the case for the page, the other for the blog. Let's see one more case, and I think that will be it. In this case, you just get to the item and get statements about it. But why not firing just the custom Sparkle query? And here is one I wrote that would get a list of semantic books. But this time, the format will be table. I think it will be more convenient. Yeah, and so again, it will create these properties, and they will be again in this outliner form. But at the end, you see the results here as a table, and these are the items from Wikidata. There is something here to clear, a small bug note now I see. The title, of course, the authors, and most of this book, I'm sure you know. And that's about it. I would like to finish with a few words about how I see these things evolving. What it seems to me is that the personal knowledge graphs, or the idea behind it, goes through to 3 stages. So previously we were struggling to integrate apps. Our personal information was, and is still, of course, trapped in different small silos, like spreadsheets, like different project management tools, our bookmarks, our email, Word documents, or whatever else you have in the to-do apps, and so on. So we're struggling to integrate them somehow. In this new development, we see a lot of tools that are coming to help with that. But the graphs that we have, in my case, in fact, I stopped using a lot of tools I used to use previously. For example, tools like Trello, because everything that I had in Trello, and it's important for me, is available in my knowledge graphs through Rome. PowerPoint, you see, I'm not using PowerPoint, I'm using my graph. I'm very rarely using Word, things like Pastebin, because it has a lot of nice features to store code. I think about 12 different apps I stopped using. So this is not so great. In terms of integration, it's nice, but in terms of centralization, it is not really. So what's happening, we have the data, the graph, and it's quite tightly coupled with the application. They're by the same vendor, so some of them has amazing features, and what is missing, normally they allow to be available as plugins. These plugins add the missing functionalities, like you saw something that was adding something, a missing functionality that was Sparkle querying. They're not always pretty. They also expose, in some cases, your graph to certain, becomes more vulnerable. That that could easily be accessed through, for example, in this case that I'm using JavaScript. But I think that these extensions, they show some ecological trend. I think the ecosystem is developing in a way that they will be different, and they will grow, and they will be the main thing at some point. So I believe that at some point we'll enter a third stage, where our knowledge graph will be, so it might not be one, it might be distributed, but that would be actually what we care about, what we develop, and then we get different functionalities that we want from different small applications that are done to work together and with our data as much as we allow it. So apps are visiting magicians. They come and they do what they do, store it in your data. They don't store anything at their side, where the current projects like Solid, I think, play an important role. And this vision also means that, and I'll conclude with that, just like enterprise knowledge graphs, personal knowledge graphs should be data-centric. Data should be self-describing, expressing non-proprietary formats, because we want to share our knowledge with others and to get knowledge from others. And applications should be just views, not really coupled with as it is now. That should be extended also to security. And I must say that in the case of Rome and a few other tools, that is a major concern, how security is solved. I'm sure that they're working on that, but currently that's not the case. Well, that was all from my side. I'll be happy to answer more questions if there are.
Yeah, this really, really helpful and compelling description of what you've done, Ivo. So thanks for laying it all out for us. I think Martinas Jusevicius has a question. Wouldn't we need an open source RDF-based alternative to Rome to do the things you're talking about? And I think you alluded to that, but maybe you can be more explicit.
This is how I discovered Canopy.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the open source alternatives of Rome that are built very much similar to Rome as well, which are Athens Research and Logsec, they currently do not have much interest in RDF. I don't know if this will change, but the nice thing about these tools is the way they provide affordances with working with texts and contexts, and the way you can write to your future self and read from your past self, and it's very serendipitous. You make all the time unexpected discoveries, and you link new things. So it's really like an extended part of your thoughts and research and references. That is the focus there. I believe that if there is more opportunity for the user to also add explicit semantics and add tools that you don't always yourself define all the entities, but with some entity extractions, algorithms, they are proposed by the tool themselves, and you just agree or modify that. It's another thing which is missing currently and probably will be added soon. But well, the short answer is I haven't heard, apart from Canopy, another tool that is close to RDF.
Yeah, and we'll be hearing more from Brian later on in the workshop regarding that alternative, Martinez. So from the speakers, any other questions for Ivo? Chu, any questions for Ivo?
Ivo, are you releasing the plugins? Sorry if you mentioned that, but is this going to be something you're at your own community? Because I'm very curious to see the reaction.
The one is a practice, not a plugin. So when it will be released, it will be just a bunch of templates and explanation how to use them. It's not a real plugin. Mm-hmm. And the other is a plugin that is currently in development, and it's part of a platform called Rome.js, where there are other plugins. It will be released probably in a week or two. And I hope that the community will bring more ideas how they should be extended. It was quite recent. Just I think that the work on it started a couple of weeks ago, so it's a very new one.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Chu, any thoughts or questions?
Really, just thinking about like the open source version of all this, because I'm very vendor agnostic. So thought is just how to achieve, the personal knowledge graph without being locked into any specific vendor, because that's how to be data centric, right? But when you're locked into a vendor, then you're kind of moving away from data centric principles. So that was like my thought.
Can't agree more.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Ivo, and really appreciate all the thought that's gone into what you've just presented. I know the audience benefited from it as well. And Steve, I'm wondering if we could take a break before we come back.